Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan along with Kathryn Peterson. And as always, we bring every Wednesday a new episode to you designed to help enhance your professional life, your personal life, and how you're going to blend those together. And today we're going to dig into one of the resources Kathryn and I have used over the years in which to manage a lot of those details. It is a spreadsheet tool for visual planning, but really we just want to talk with you about the concept of displayed thinking, how we take some of these thoughts around our plans, put them in the context of other thoughts, and organize them in such a way in which we can execute. And if that didn't sound nerdy enough for you, just wait till Kathryn and I get to talking about it today. Kathryn, so good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, as always. And this is a tool I utilize a lot, so I'm excited to spend some time on it.
Yeah, it's one that I do as well. I find that it's not just something I personally find valuable, but it's one that I share pretty often. If I have a live day with a client, it almost always comes out because when you have enough time to spend with a client in a live day context, you're usually bringing out lots of different ideas that deserve attention and execution. And this is such a great way to put them into an easy to follow visual tool that then allows us to break down into very actionable steps. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. I know our audience isn't looking at a tool. I hope what if you're out there listening to us today, this is less about imagining what a spreadsheet looks like, because boy, that sounds boring. Let's talk more about why we use it, how it works, how it benefits us, and dig into some of the more practical applications.
Okay, I'm ready. So first, explain what visual planning is and how it's different than other planning tools.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's a great place to start. When most of us are creating plans of any kind, it's very common to whether we start with a whiteboard or whether we start with a journal, whether we have a worksheet that we work through, or even some sort of tool that we've been trained on. We often are creating it in such a way in which our objectives, our strategies, and our tactics get somewhat siloed in the context of that plan, meaning we might have an objective, what we're trying to accomplish, a strategy, how we plan to get after it, and then tactics, the actual step by step that we're going to follow.
Mhm.
What happens when you have 6 or 8 of those things going on in the same season? Really hard to keep track of all of those. And so a visual planning tool is really preferred when we're dealing with folks that are more entrepreneurial in their orientation, but I would argue it works just as well at home for those of you that have kids and you're managing lots of moving parts in your household. It's a way to get all of those objectives, strategies, and tactics into a framework that you can see at one time so that you understand how the flow of deciding what you're going to do in one area might impact your capacity for the other areas that you're also managing. So I like it for that reason. It puts everything in front of you at once.
Absolutely. So then describe the process of engaging visual planning. So what are the specific steps that someone would go through?
So I suppose if anyone out there is thinking, we're recording this in the fall of 2024. So a lot of our listeners, as they listen on a drop date, are probably thinking about their 2025 planning process if they're not already beginning some of the steps that would warm them up to that. When you are in the process of creating specific plans, I think what I would say you would benefit from most in the steps of this process are identifying your goals and identifying with those goals, which we're going to call objectives in this context, um, how many different strategic steps are required to achieve those goals, really getting someone to think through. So it's a lot of discussion before you do anything.
Mhm.
It's a lot of, okay, tell me about that. What would you need for that? What would happen next? Okay, now you have that. Who else needs to be involved? Where else do you need to in other words, it's a lot of discussion around the complexity of that strategy. And the idea is let's get all of it out on the table at once so that we can try to sort it in such a way that we're taking one of our earlier episode topics around batching. We try to batch certain activities together so we get some efficiency there, and we're also trying to look at things through the context of flow. Certain things have to happen before other things happen, And it's really helpful when you've got a tool that allows you to break them down into those steps, because then you can start to see how you might schedule those, how much time you might need, and who you might need to delegate those to in order to get them done. So it's, again, a way to take a very normal planning process like we all do and give you the resources you need to really map out every step necessary to reach your goals, to complete those objectives.
So then let's talk specifically about the Building Champions tool, and how does that help somebody through that process or enhance that process as they go through that process?
Well, I don't know if it helps them as much in the process as it does in the result. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is, I think we could accomplish the discussion of all those steps in that process without the tool. It's not that the concepts are difficult. It's okay, now that we've had that discussion, how do I keep track of it all? How do I know, we've talked about so many things. I don't remember where I'm supposed to start. I don't remember what's
mhm,
next. And so I think it's more in the results, Catherine. It's more in, now the planning is transitioning into action. We're actually going to do some of what we said we're going to do.
mhm,
And when you've got a lot of moving parts, I think the version we use at Building Champions simply allows us to keep track of all that, both in terms of measurable progress on what's current and keeping track of the plan for and what's next and what's next. So that someone isn't spending a lot of time looking at their plan and either forgetting those necessary steps that we agreed, because that can
mhm,
happen, or even worse, skipping things because it's not that they forgot it. They're just like, "Ah, I don't really like that step. I'm gonna jump to the step I really like." Well, when you see it in the flow of that visual planning tool, you're acknowledging I'm skipping a step. Well, how many of us have, made a recipe before where we skipped a step? Doesn't always
mhm,
turn out like we wanted. Or how many times have we gone to IKEA to put something together and we thought, oh, I see how this works, and we skip a step and then it doesn't work as well. So
mhm.
I think it's an accountability tool for the back end more than it is the process, because most of us could have this dialogue without the tool, but it would be really hard to keep track of all the details afterwards.
Mhm. Got it. That's helpful. And so let's kind of dig into the actual tool. So there's 2 pages,
Yeah.
and we can talk to what those are. So talk to me about how those differ from each other.
Well, like any good spreadsheet, we've designed it to where those cells are going to flow from one to the other. So what the first thing I'd say is really helpful is most of what we're going to work on sheet one is designed to flow through to sheet two. But again, without a visual for our audience, I would simply say this: as we pick a period of time in which we're going to execute on several objectives, several key areas that we're going to focus on. So those are all the steps we're going to take and what it's going to ultimately take to hit the goal that we've set for ourselves. We need some way in which on page one, as we break that all down. So if our audience can visualize, you might have, four, six, maybe even eight different key areas of your business going simultaneously. And maybe let's give a few examples just so our audience
Yeah, let's do that.
has a sense of that. So let's say you're in real estate, and let's say as a audience member, your primary job is to help people buy and sell real estate. So you're a real estate agent. You might have in your visual planning tool an area of your business that is specifically focused on the running of your business. So you have a certain key area of operational steps, things you have to do to manage your business, whether that's related to, the database that you maintain, the accounting that you maintain, the
Mhm,
scheduling that you maintain. These are all the internal things. Well, that's all going at the same time that you also might need to be managing your active clients, and there are several key areas in there related to contracts, related to inspections, related to communications. You get the flow here, but that's going on simultaneously with another set of key areas that are all in the ways that you prospect, the ways that you're maybe distributing your brand through marketing, the way that you're using social media, the way that you're planning events. And so you start to get the picture here that all of these things, if you're in real estate, are happening at the same time. They're
mhm,
all important and they all have to be managed. So as you start breaking down the tool into these key areas on that page one, Page two, as you described, is going to allow us to say, okay, well, if, let's take that third category I mentioned in prospecting. You're gonna have some branding that you're gonna distribute. Well, that may be your postcard campaign. Well, now you can on page two assign the dates in which you're going to get those postcards out. Who is responsible for managing the print or the delivery of those postcards, and your ability to red, yellow, or green as you track the progress. Are we on time? Are we getting close to the deadline, or are we past the deadline? And so page two is a really helpful dashboard tool, especially if you have teammates, because you can check in on several of
Mhm.
these verticals in your business, because you might not be responsible for all of them. You may have teammates that
Mhm.
are responsible for certain things. And so I like the flow, the way the tool is designed from one to two, because it gives us an opportunity to really keep track of those details in the order that they're going, and check in with the person who's responsible, whether it's a teammate or maybe I've outsourced it. I've delegated it to, my accountant. I've delegated it to the HR benefits person. I've delegated it to the person who runs the print shop. Well, those are keeping track of the dates we set so that I know it's when it's time to check in and move that from yellow back into green.
And I'm gonna give another example because I think it will be helpful. So
Love it.
I use it a lot when I hire and when I train. So once the person starts, it helps us categorize the different areas that we have to train them in. So for example, office management, it might be how to use the scanner, how to tasks that need to be done. And then there might be a marketing category for different systems that we use and different things to train. It might be processing, or it might be different categories, learning the industry, etc. And then the because of those categories, it then helps us go to the next page where it will
Mm,
say, hey, instead of me doing the training, I'm going to have you sit with the title company, or I'm going to have you do this, and here's the due date and where you at on it. So it just gives the new teammate a really good visual tool to
mm.
say, here's what my training is going to look like. And it also helps them hold me accountable for, hey, we still have 10 things to train on that we haven't talked about. When are we going to have time to do that?
Love that example. That's a great example. So you went for a very tactical, operational example. Let's give another one, because I think our audience will benefit from these. Imagine you've decided it's time to change companies, and you're going to
Mm,
go evaluate different organizations who operate on perhaps similar platforms, but they have different operational values. They have different systems. They have different technologies. Maybe they even follow slightly different processes. And so this tool could also be very helpful
mhm,
in that evaluation process. It could be helpful if you're responsible for recruiting people and you're keeping track of all kinds of different individual people that you're spending time with. You know, that's so these examples are really helpful, Kathryn, because I think our audience may think, oh, well, planning, I need this for that?
mhm,
Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It probably depends on how complex the footprint of what you're trying to manage is. For your example, you've got a full-time job already as a team leader who's responsible for driving the income that flows through your team. Once you add a new teammate, that's like a whole nother job that you have now
mhm,
as the trainer of that person. And so you can start to imagine how that would divide your focus. And if we don't have something that helps you keep track of all that, it's very easy to imagine that things just slip through the cracks because we're in go time most of the time.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice all the time. I'll go out and see this on their desk and with like writing on it. I'm like, oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, good. So that's the
Yeah.
stuff that can be really helpful for people. So then once this is built,
Yeah.
it's obviously, I brought it up a little bit, but how often do people need to revisit it or look at it, check in on it? Because I know we're all really good at building things that we never look at again.
I'm glad you said this, because that could happen to someone who was so happy that they got all of their ideas down into one document that they can keep track of everything, and then they just go and forget about it. My best advice on this one is simple advice. I think as any leader, regardless as you're listening of the organization you run. So, let's say you're our friend Courtney Wilson, who was a guest on the show last week.
Mhm,
Imagine all of the projects she's managing as a person responsible for organization. I mean, she's a professional organizer. And
mhm,
so not only is she accountable to all she's managing, but the expectation they have on her is pretty high. Like, I'm hiring you to be organized. I hope you're organized. So imagine on her version of visual planning, um, how many of these things that she has going simultaneously and at different phases, like some are at the consultation phase, some are at the contract phase, some are at the scheduled phase, and some are at the,
Mhm.
hey, we're there tomorrow. Like, it's time to go. As you're doing all of this, if you're not looking at that tool on a weekly basis, it's very difficult to leverage it in the way it was designed. If you start to look at it occasionally or once a month, the risk is that you've already moved past some of those steps. And back to our earlier comment, we may look back and find out, oh, I skipped a step or two because, oh, yeah, those are the
Mm.
things I don't really like to do. Where if you're looking at it weekly, there's a little bit of accountability to your own commitments. You wrote
Mhm.
those down and you said either I'm the person responsible or I've delegated it to someone who's now expecting me to close the loop. I like it on a weekly basis because it really shortens the gap between intention and execution.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then as you update it and look at it, how do you adjust it or change some key parts of it? Or let's talk through that because obviously nothing is solid, everything is fluid in our world.
Yeah, I'm going to reference another one of our guests from a few months ago, Kim Mason. I know when she and I went through
Mhm.
a version of this planning tool as we sat down together, maybe back this summer, I asked her that question. I said, "Are you going to want to, as you turn these into green because they were good, and you've now accomplished the entire set of steps we created for that objective? So mission accomplished, and in each of these columns, do you like to check those off, or do you like to delete them and replace them with the next one?" And we really had some interesting discussion around that.
Hmm.
And I think it's the right discussion for the question you just asked is I think some folks visually like that sheet to turn from just white, this is just the idea, to green, yellow, red, and then move as many of them into green as they can until the whole thing is
Hmm.
just lit up. That's a satisfying process for them. And so they view the
Yeah.
period of time they define this as, hey, I don't need to edit it as I go. I just need to knock them
Hmm.
out. So it becomes
Hmm.
their version of a checklist. If that's how you're wired, wonderful. If you're wired differently, where you see this as more of a fluid tool, like I'm
Hmm.
always in some version of this process, but I'm knocking certain things off as I'm adding new things on, and it's a
Hmm.
very fluid tool. The beauty of it is it's a spreadsheet. Add another column and
Yeah.
keep going. Uh, for some folks, that becomes overwhelming. Like, okay, now I've got
Hmm.
too many columns, too much to manage. I I think everybody knows their personality type. And so I don't know that there's a wrong answer to this. Well, yes, I do. The wrong answer is back to your previous question that you just don't pay any attention to it.
Right.
As long as you're paying attention to it, if you like checking the boxes, then keep it as a static document and just change the colors. If you're someone who likes it to be more fluid, move things off of the sheet as you accomplish them, move new things on. And I think tomato, tomato, they both lead to a win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So where have you experienced successes with this? We've talked through some of them. And then where have some challenges popped up with this tool?
So remember when we talked about mindset and we had an episode where we discussed the difference between, I think we were doing the book review and we talked about the difference with growth mindset and fixed mindset. Well, some folks come into this exercise with a fixed mindset, and
Hmm.
let's say they're a bit perfectionist in their nature. Well, the minute we create this spreadsheet and anything deviates from the process flow they designed because,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, another step came up that we didn't think about, or oh my gosh, I did the step that we thought about, but then there's other people involved with these processes, but I didn't account for what someone else was going to
Hmm.
do to make it more complicated or slow it down. And they get frustrated, and so they become discouraged because, oh, I wanted it to be just as clean and fluid as we designed it. I wanted it to just be perfect, like a set of instructions, just follow the steps. And So I used the analogy earlier of that, IKEA instructions or a recipe. This is where it does differ from that because unlike recipes and unlike the set of instructions at IKEA, you are documenting key areas for executing on your strategies one step at a time. And that means you are discovering as you make progress
Mhm.
how the audience is reacting to those steps. The audience might be your teammates, the audience might be your partners, might be your customers, might just be you. But wherever that reaction is to these steps may determine the modifications that we make as this strategic, or I'm sorry, this visual planning tool evolves. So that's maybe the answer I'm going to give you is if you have a fixed mindset and you come in thinking, well, it's either got to stay right here in this tight little box we created or it's a fail, well, then it's not going to be very fun. I would encourage embrace the growth mindset, which is what does this tool help me learn to make my business
Mhm.
flow better?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that gives our listeners and viewers a really good picture of the tool and of visual planning in general. Is there anything else that you want to add before we close this episode?
Kathryn, it's an interesting one in that I know you and I have found a lot of great satisfaction using an exercise like this. Our audience might just be hearing about this, but thinking, I haven't ever seen this resource. How would I do that? So I'm going to put that challenge out to our audience. If this is something that you're thinking that sounds like a resource that would be helpful to me, whether you're an entrepreneur trying to manage multiple areas of your business, or you're, a stay-at-home parent trying to manage multiple pieces of moving parts,
Yeah.
with your kids' lives and your home life and everything else that you do. If this intrigued you enough to say, I'd like to see this, would you please reach out? Kathryn and I are both available through our Instagram accounts where we often market each week's podcast, and we'd be happy to help you with that. I'm always happy to share resources that we have. That's one of the things I love about building champions is we're very um, generous with with some of our branded
Mhm.
content because we know at the end of the day, we're not creating tools that are so proprietary that we're giving away our, trade secrets. We know the real effort comes in the execution, and if I can help you with that, I'd be happy to share a visual planning tool with anyone who's interested.
Mhm. Yeah, I like this talk because it's expanded. I've been kind of fixed in my mindset of what I can use it for. So I've been thinking as we've been talking about other areas of my life and business that I can potentially use this in. And we use something very similar to this to plan our podcast. So it made me think about that as well. So I'm glad that we brought this up because I'm now thinking about it a little differently. So we'll see if I get creative with this tool as well.
For our audience's benefit, Kathryn and I still continue to work together as coaching clients. So if I can help Kathryn, I can help you. So follow her lead on that. She'll be the first in line. But I'm sure you're right about that. I'm sure if our audience is listening, they too could find some creative ways to use
Mhm.
it. And ultimately, that's what we want from the tools that we use. We don't need more
Yeah.
worksheets to fill out. Our life is full of paperwork. We need things that allow us to boil things down and execute and get them done. And that's what I like the
Mhm.
most about it is it helps you
Yeah.
get things done.
Absolutely. Well, we've had another great episode of Building Bigger Lives. We're going to close this one out. We've talked through the visual planning tool, and you can find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, and reach out anytime. We love to have some feedback on our episodes. Please subscribe, give us a great rating, and share. Thanks so much for joining us today.